The glass shatters before I even realize I've dropped it. Champagne pools across white linen as every head in the restaurant turns toward our table. But I'm not looking at the mess. I'm looking at her. 2 tables away, Yuki freezes with her wine glass halfway to her lips. And beside me, Kenji's face drains of every drop of color as he finally understands what I've done. What I know. What I've always known. The maitre d' rushes over, but I raise my hand, still smiling that same serene smile I've perfected over 3 months of living with a liar. Because this isn't an accident. This is the opening act. The sound of the glass breaking echoes in my mind like a starting gun. I can feel every eye in the room on me, can sense the shift from celebration to confusion. Kenji's hand reaches for mine under the table, his fingers cold and trembling. He's trying to maintain composure, trying to signal that everything is fine, just a clumsy accident. But I pull my hand away slowly, deliberately, and let him see the steel in my eyes. This is the moment he's been dreading since the first lie left his lips, though he didn't know it until now. 3 months earlier, I thought I knew what love looked like. It looked like Sunday mornings in our Upper West Side apartment, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows while Kenji made his perfect Japanese breakfast. It looked like 10 years of marriage built on what I believed was unwavering trust. It looked like the art gallery I'd nurtured from a dream into reality. My paintings finally gaining recognition in a city that devours the hopeful and spits out the naive. I was 42 and foolish enough to believe I'd figured out the formula for happiness. The universe laughs at women like me. Those Sunday mornings had become a ritual I cherished. Kenji would wake early, moving quietly through the kitchen so as not to disturb me. The smell of miso soup would drift into the bedroom, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed green tea. I'd find him at the stove, perfectly dressed even at 7 in the morning, preparing tamagoyaki with the precision of a craftsman. He'd plate everything beautifully, rice in lacquered bowls, pickled vegetables arranged like artwork. We'd eat in comfortable silence, or talk about the week ahead, my upcoming exhibitions, his business deals. It felt like partnership. It felt like home. Now I realize it was just another performance, one more way he compartmentalized his life into neat, manageable sections. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday, such an ordinary day. I was sorting through Kenji's dry cleaning, that mindless domestic task that somehow makes you feel like you're taking care of someone you love. My fingers brushed paper in his jacket pocket, just a receipt. Nothing sinister about a receipt, except this one was from the Peninsula Hotel. $500 for a single night. The date stamped across the top was from 2 weeks ago, when Kenji told me he was working late at the investment firm, closing a deal that would secure his partnership. I remember that moment with crystalline clarity. I was standing in our walk-in closet, surrounded by Kenji's meticulously organized suits. Each one hung with exactly 2 inches of space between them, arranged by color from darkest to lightest. His shoes were lined up below, polished to a mirror shine. Everything about Kenji's life was ordered, controlled, perfect. And that receipt was chaos. It was a crack in the facade, a glimpse into something I wasn't supposed to see. My first instinct was denial. I actually laughed out loud, a sharp, brittle sound that startled me in the quiet apartment. There had to be an explanation. Kenji wasn't the type to cheat. He was steady, reliable, almost boring in his consistency. He came home every night. He called when he said he would. He remembered birthdays and anniversaries. These weren't the behaviors of a man living a double life. Were they? I stood in our bedroom, that receipt trembling in my hands, and felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. The metallic taste of shock flooded my mouth. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror across the room. Mariko Tanaka, successful gallery owner, nurturing wife, complete idiot. The woman in the mirror looked so small suddenly, drowning in the pristine white walls and minimalist furniture Kenji had insisted would bring us peace. Peace. The word tasted like ash. I studied my reflection for a long time that day. Really looked at myself in a way I hadn't in years. When had I started looking so tired? There were lines around my eyes I didn't remember, a tightness to my mouth that spoke of stress I'd been suppressing. My hair, which I'd always worn long and loose, was pulled back in a severe bun. When had I started wearing it that way? Kenji preferred it, said it made me look more professional. I'd adopted it without question. One more small surrender in a marriage of 1,000 small surrenders. You know that moment when your brain splits in two? One half screaming that something is catastrophically wrong, while the other half builds elaborate explanations to protect you from the truth? I lived in that split for exactly 48 hours. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe a client needed privacy for sensitive negotiations. Maybe Kenji was planning a surprise for our anniversary next month. Maybe I was being paranoid, letting the stress of my upcoming gallery exhibition warp my perception. During those 48 hours, I watched Kenji with new eyes. I noticed things I'd somehow missed before. The way he angled his phone away from me when texting. How he'd started showering immediately when he got home, before even greeting me properly. The new cologne he'd bought, subtler than his usual choice. Small things, individually meaningless. Together, a pattern. I also noticed how I'd changed my behavior around him. I caught myself being overly agreeable, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, suppressing opinions he might find challenging. When had I become so accommodating? The Mariko I used to be had opinions, strong ones. She'd argue about art and politics and the meaning of life. She'd push back when someone was wrong. Where had she gone? When had I traded authenticity for peace? I confronted him that Thursday evening. I'd rehearsed it all day, trying to keep my voice casual, light, not accusatory. We were in the kitchen, Kenji chopping vegetables with the precise movements he brought to everything. I slid the receipt across the marble counter. His knife paused for just a fraction of a second. That pause told me everything, though I wasn't ready to hear it yet. The kitchen was warm, steam rising from the pot where Kenji was making curry. It was my favorite meal, something he made on Thursdays when he knew I'd had a long week. The domesticity of the moment made what I was about to ask seem absurd. How could this man, who was making me dinner with such care, be betraying me? But I forced the words out anyway. What's this? I tried to sound curious rather than accusatory. My therapist would later tell me this was classic behavior for people afraid of conflict. We phrase discoveries as questions, give the betrayer a chance to explain, because some part of us desperately wants there to be an innocent explanation. He looked up with those dark eyes I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago and laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was warm, affectionate, tinged with gentle confusion at my concern. He explained that he'd taken a client there for drinks. The hotel bar was renowned for its whiskey selection. The charge must have been for the room because the client got too drunk and needed a place to sleep it off. Kenji had been embarrassed to mention it, worried I'd think he was enabling unprofessional behavior. He delivered the lie while maintaining perfect eye contact. His hand didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. He even added details that made the story more believable, mentioning the client's name, describing the man's embarrassment the next morning. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't been looking for deception, I would have believed him completely. Hell, I wanted to believe him. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. The explanation was perfect. Too perfect. It slid into place with the smooth precision of a lie someone's been polishing in their mind for weeks. But I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. So I swallowed my doubt like poison and smiled and told him I understood. I kissed him and pretended everything was fine. That night, as he slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and felt my sanity begin to fracture. The sleeplessness started that night and never really stopped. I'd lie in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the city filtering through our double-paned windows. Car horns, distant sirens, the occasional shout from the street below. Normal sounds of normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. I'd count Kenji's breaths, watch the rise and fall of his chest, and wonder who he really was. The man beside me felt like a stranger wearing my husband's face. I started playing a terrible game during those sleepless hours. I'd mentally review our entire relationship, looking for signs I'd missed. Our first date, at a Japanese restaurant in the East Village, where he'd impressed me by ordering entirely in Japanese. Our third date, when he'd taken me to MoMA and spent 3 hours discussing a single Rothko painting, understanding art in a way that made my heart race. Our wedding, small and intimate, just family and close friends. Had he been lying then? Had he always been capable of this level of deception? Or had something changed him along the way? Have you ever doubted your own mind? Not just questioned a decision, but fundamentally wondered if you can trust your own perception of reality? That's what gaslighting does. It doesn't just make you doubt the truth, it makes you doubt yourself. And Kenji was a master craftsman. The second crack appeared 3 days later. I was organizing our home office when his phone buzzed on the desk. A text message preview lit up the screen. The message was in Japanese, from a contact saved simply as Y. The characters were intimate, affectionate. My Japanese is rusty, learned from Kenji over the years of our marriage, but good enough to understand the tone, good enough to recognize endearment when I saw it. The message said, "Jinya hoyenai? Anata ni aitai. Can't we meet tonight? I want to see you." The words were casual, familiar, the kind of message you send to someone you see regularly, someone you're comfortable with, someone who isn't just a colleague or a friend. My hands started shaking before my conscious mind had fully processed what I was seeing. My hands shook as I set the phone down. Kenji was in the shower. I could hear the water running, could picture him standing under the spray without a care in the world while my entire existence crumbled like wet paper. I didn't confront him this time. Some instinct for self-preservation kicked in, the same instinct that helps prey animals know when to run. Instead, I took a photo of the message with my own phone, my fingers fumbling with adrenaline. Taking that photo felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. I was spying on my husband. I was documenting his private conversations. A week ago, the thought would have horrified me. I believed in trust, in privacy, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But that woman was gone now, replaced by someone harder, someone who understood that survival sometimes requires compromising your principles. I took the photo and hated myself for it. But I took it anyway. That night at dinner, Kenji talked about his day with the easy charm that had first attracted me. He asked about my gallery, listened attentively to my concerns about the upcoming exhibition. He refilled my wine glass, he smiled, and I played along. This horrible theater where we both pretended to be characters in a marriage that no longer existed. I wondered if he could see the fractures spreading across my face like cracks in porcelain. I became obsessed with studying him, looking for tells. Did his left eye twitch when he lied? Did he touch his neck, clear his throat? But Kenji gave nothing away. He was perfectly calibrated, every word and gesture calculated to maintain the illusion. Years in high-stakes business negotiations had taught him to control every micro-expression. I was outmatched and I knew it. I needed help. The isolation was the worst part. Who could I tell? My parents had passed years ago. My sister lived in California, caught up in her own life. The friends I'd made in New York were mostly through Kenji, his colleagues' wives, people who saw us as a unit rather than individuals. Telling any of them felt like announcing my failure, admitting I'd been blind to what was probably obvious to everyone else. The humiliation of being the last to know was suffocating. I thought about the dinner parties we'd hosted, the charity galas we'd attended. Had people known? Had I been the clueless wife while everyone else whispered behind my back? I remembered a fundraiser 6 months ago where one of Kenji's colleagues, Michael, had made a strange comment. He'd said something about Kenji being lucky to have such an understanding wife. At the time, I'd taken it as a compliment. Now I wondered what he'd really meant. Did they all know? Were they all complicit in my humiliation? I started sleeping poorly. 2 hours here, 3 hours there, waking repeatedly to the sound of my own racing heart. I'd lie in the darkness listening to Kenji breathe and wonder who he was. Not who I thought he was, but who he actually was beneath the performance. The man beside me had become a stranger, and yet I was still expected to love him, trust him, share my body and my life with him. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. The physical symptoms started to manifest. I lost my appetite, had to force myself to eat even though food tasted like cardboard. My clothes started hanging loose. I developed a nervous habit of checking my phone constantly, jumping at every notification, convinced somehow that the truth would reveal itself in a text message or email. I couldn't focus at work, kept losing my train of thought mid-conversation. My assistant, Emma, asked if I was feeling okay. I blamed it on stress, on the upcoming exhibition, on anything but the truth. But somewhere in those sleepless hours, something shifted. The sadness began to calcify into something harder, sharper. Anger, yes, but more than that. Determination. If Kenji thought I was naive enough to accept his lies indefinitely, he'd miscalculated. I'd built my gallery from nothing, navigated the cutthroat New York art world, learned to trust my instincts about which artists would succeed. Those same instincts were screaming now, and I was finally ready to listen. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like ice forming on a lake. Each lie Kenji told added another layer. Each time I swallowed my suspicion and smiled, I felt myself hardening. The woman who'd found that hotel receipt would have confronted Kenji, demanded explanations, maybe even believed his lies. But that woman was being replaced by someone colder, someone capable of strategic thinking, someone who understood that emotional reactions get you nowhere. Evidence gets you justice. I stopped crying and started planning. The first step was information. I needed to know everything. Not suspicions or partial truths, but the complete picture of who my husband had become. And I needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Evidence that would protect me when everything inevitably fell apart. I went to the library and checked out books on infidelity, investigation, divorce law. I read them in coffee shops during my lunch breaks, far from anyone who might recognize me. I learned about phone monitoring, financial tracking, the legal requirements for proving adultery in New York. I took notes in a journal I kept locked in my desk at the gallery. I was building a war chest of knowledge, arming myself for the battle ahead. My best friend Sarah had always been the practical one, the counterbalance to my artistic tendencies. We'd met at a gallery opening 5 years ago, bonded over our shared love of contemporary Japanese art. She worked in tech, understood digital footprints and data trails. When I finally broke down and called her, telling her everything in a whispered rush while Kenji was at work, she didn't waste time with sympathy. She went straight into problem-solving mode. Sarah met me at a Starbucks in Midtown, far from my usual neighborhood. She looked at me carefully when I arrived, and I knew I must look terrible. I'd stopped bothering with makeup, stopped styling my hair with any care. What was the point of looking good for a man who was fucking someone else? "Jesus, Mari," she said quietly, "you look like hell." "I feel like hell," I admitted. It was the first time I'd been completely honest with anyone in weeks. The relief was almost physical. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." We met at a coffee shop in the village, far enough from my usual haunts that we wouldn't run into anyone who knew Kenji. Sarah pulled out her laptop like we were discussing a business proposal. She walked me through phone monitoring apps, showed me how to check browser histories, explained the art of digital surveillance. I felt simultaneously empowered and disgusted with myself. This wasn't who I wanted to be, but Kenji had made the choice to lie. I was simply choosing to uncover the truth. "This one," Sarah said, pointing to an app on her screen. "It's discreet, nearly impossible to detect. It'll give you location tracking, message logs, call records, everything you need. Isn't this illegal? I asked, though I already knew I was going to do it regardless. Sarah shrugged. Technically, you're not supposed to monitor someone without their knowledge, but you're married. It's a gray area. And honestly, Mari, fuck legal. He's cheating on you. You have a right to protect yourself. She was right, of course. This wasn't about legality. It was about survival. About reclaiming some measure of control in a situation designed to make me powerless. I nodded, and Sarah began explaining how to install the software. Installing the tracking app on Kenji's phone required nerve I didn't know I possessed. I waited until he was in the shower again, that vulnerability of water and steam. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped his phone twice. But I managed it, hiding the app in a folder of legitimate business applications where it would blend in. The whole thing took maybe 90 seconds. Those 90 seconds aged me a decade. As I heard the shower turn off, I placed his phone back exactly where he'd left it, screen down on the nightstand. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought he'd surely hear it when he came out. But Kenji emerged from the bathroom in a cloud of steam, towel wrapped around his waist, completely oblivious. He smiled at me, asked what I wanted for dinner. I suggested sushi. He kissed my forehead and said he'd order from our favorite place. The normalcy of it was surreal, grotesque even. How could he be so calm when my entire world was falling apart? The data started flowing in immediately. Location tracking showed patterns I'd never noticed. 3 times a week, Kenji's phone pinged from an address in Chelsea. Not his office, not anywhere I recognized. Bank statements revealed cash withdrawals I couldn't account for, always in amounts just small enough to avoid scrutiny. 200 here, 300 there. Over months, it added up to thousands of dollars vanishing into some parallel life I knew nothing about. I created spreadsheets documenting every anomaly. Dates, times, locations, amounts. I cross-referenced his location data with his explanations to me. Working late meant he was in Chelsea. Dinner with clients meant he was at restaurants I'd never heard of. Business trip to Boston meant his phone never left Manhattan. Every lie was cataloged, time-stamped, preserved for future use. The evidence was damning and growing by the day. The financial discoveries were particularly galling. We had a joint account for household expenses, but Kenji managed most of our investments. He'd assured me over the years that he was building our future, making smart decisions that would set us up for retirement. I'd trusted him completely, hadn't even looked at the statements. Now I realized what a mistake that had been. He'd been siphoning money for months, maybe years. Cash withdrawals that added up to nearly $30,000 over the past year alone. $30,000 of our money funding his affair. But it was the phone records that broke me. A single number appeared again and again. Dozens of calls, some lasting an hour or more. Text messages I couldn't read because they were encrypted through an app I didn't have access to. And the name associated with that number, found through a reverse lookup search Sarah ran, was Yuki Nakamura. A woman I'd never heard Kenji mention. A woman who apparently spoke to my husband more than I did. I looked Yuki up online, of course, found her LinkedIn profile, her Instagram, her Facebook. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women have, delicate features and perfect skin. 34 years old, 8 years younger than me. She worked in PR, specialized in crisis management. The irony wasn't lost on me. She managed crises professionally while creating one in my personal life. Her social media was carefully curated, mostly professional. But there were glimpses of a personal life. Photos from trips to Japan, to Paris, to tropical beaches, expensive restaurants, designer clothes, a lifestyle that didn't quite match her salary. I wondered how much of it Kenji had funded. I wondered if she knew he was married, or if he'd lied to her too. Part of me hoped she was innocent, another victim of Kenji's deception. But a larger, angrier part of me knew the truth. She knew. Women always know. I remember sitting at my gallery late one night, long after closing, surrounded by the artwork I'd curated with such care. Beautiful pieces about love and loss, human connection, the complexity of relationships. And I thought about how artists try to capture truth in paint and canvas, while real life is just layers of lies we tell ourselves to survive. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. One painting in particular caught my attention that night. It was by a young Japanese-American artist named Hana Yoshida, a series exploring identity and cultural duality. The centerpiece showed a woman's face split down the middle. One half was traditional, serene, makeup applied with geisha precision. The other half was raw, vulnerable, scarred. The painting was titled, "The Face We Show, the Truth We Hide." I stared at it until my vision blurred with tears. That's what my marriage had become, a beautiful facade hiding rot beneath. The investigation consumed me. Every spare moment was spent piecing together Kenji's secret life. I tracked the Chelsea address to a luxury apartment building. I sat in my car across the street for 3 hours one afternoon, feeling like a character in a bad thriller, until I saw him. Kenji walking into that building with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there. He stayed for 2 hours. When he emerged, he was smiling, checking his phone, completely unaware that his wife was watching his betrayal unfold in real time. I'll never forget that moment. Watching him walk into that building, knowing what he was going there to do, who he was going there to see. I felt like I was drowning, like the air in the car had become too thick to breathe. My vision narrowed to a tunnel, focused solely on that doorway through which my husband had just disappeared. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm across the street and drag him out. I wanted to set the whole fucking building on fire. But I didn't do any of those things. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and I documented everything. I took photos with my phone. I noted the time, the date, how long he stayed. I was methodical, precise, almost robotic, because emotion wouldn't help me now. Evidence would. Facts would. The cold, hard truth that couldn't be argued or explained away. I wanted to storm across the street, to scream and demand answers and make a scene that would shatter his carefully constructed deception. But Sarah's voice echoed in my head. Evidence first, confrontation later. Do this right, or he'll twist it around until you're the villain in his story. So I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and I documented everything. Photos, timestamps, detailed notes, building my case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. When Kenji came home that night, 4 hours after leaving that Chelsea apartment, he kissed me hello and told me about his stressful day at the office. He complained about a difficult client, about the pressure from senior partners, about how exhausted he was. The performance was Oscar-worthy. I nodded sympathetically, made him tea, rubbed his shoulders while he relaxed on the couch. And the entire time, I was screaming inside. A primal howl of rage and betrayal that I couldn't let escape. The smoking gun came 3 weeks into my investigation. Kenji had left his laptop open, a rookie mistake that suggested he'd grown comfortable in his duplicity. He'd stepped away to take a phone call in the other room. I had maybe 5 minutes. My heart hammered as I navigated to his cloud storage, searching for anything that would confirm what I already knew but couldn't yet prove. His laptop was sitting on the dining room table, screensaver off, password not yet engaged. I had a narrow window. I could hear him in the bedroom, his voice low and intimate. Talking to her, probably. Telling her he loved her, promising her things, the same way he'd once promised me forever. My hands moved across the keyboard with purpose, muscle memory from years of navigating computers. I knew where to look. Men are predictable in their hiding places. And there it was, a folder labeled innocuously as Tokyo Business Trip March. But the contents were anything but innocent. Dozens of photos, Kenji and Yuki at temples, restaurants, what was clearly a traditional ryokan. They looked like honeymooners, happy, intimate, lost in each other. In one photo, Yuki wore a yukata, standing on a balcony overlooking Kyoto at sunset. Kenji's arms were wrapped around her from behind, his face buried in her neck. The tenderness in that image cut deeper than any knife could have. There were other photos, too. Selfies of them in bed, sheets tangled around them, faces flushed with post-coital happiness. Photos of elaborate meals they'd shared, of sake they'd drunk, of temples they'd visited. An entire trip documented in loving detail. A trip that looked exactly like the honeymoon Kenji and I had taken 12 years ago. He'd recreated it with her. The same cities, probably the same restaurants, maybe even the same hotel. He'd taken our memories and given them to someone else. I sat frozen, staring at digital proof of a March I remembered very differently. Kenji had told me that trip was all business, grueling meetings with potential investors. He'd called me once, sounding exhausted, apologizing that he couldn't talk long. And all the while, he'd been playing house with another woman, creating memories that should have been ours. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the systematic destruction of our entire shared history. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to smash the laptop. I wanted to walk into that bedroom and destroy him with my bare hands. But I did none of those things. Instead, I methodically copied every file, every photo, every shred of evidence. I sent them to my email, to Sarah's email, to cloud storage accounts Kenji didn't know I had. I created backups of backups, ensuring this evidence could never be erased or denied. And then I carefully closed everything, cleared the browser history, made sure there was no trace of my discovery. Something broke in me that night, or maybe something was reforged. The sadness I'd been drowning in burned away, replaced by a cold, crystalline rage. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war. And I was done playing defense. Kenji had made his choices. Now I would make mine. And he would learn that the nurturing, conflict-avoidant wife he'd taken for granted was capable of far more than he'd ever imagined. I spent the next hour in the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to compose myself. When I finally emerged, Kenji was in the living room, watching television. He smiled when he saw me, asked if I wanted to watch with him. I said yes. I curled up next to him on the couch, let him put his arm around me, pretended everything was fine. And inside, I was planning his destruction. I copied every file, every photo, every damning piece of evidence. I created backups and sent them to Sarah, to my email, to the cloud. Then I carefully closed everything, leaving no trace that I'd been there. When Kenji returned to the living room, I was curled up on the couch with a book, the picture of domestic contentment. He kissed the top of my head. I didn't flinch, though every cell in my body recoiled from his touch. That night marked the beginning of my masquerade. The performance of my life, playing the role of unsuspecting wife while planning his downfall. I wish I could tell you it was easy, that righteous anger made me invincible. But the truth is, it nearly destroyed me. Pretending to love someone you now hate, sharing a bed with your betrayer, maintaining the facade day after day, requires a special kind of strength I didn't know I had. The first week of the masquerade was the hardest. Every smile felt like it would crack my face. Every "I love you" tasted like poison. Kenji noticed nothing, of course. Why would he? I'd been performing for weeks already, pretending I didn't suspect anything. This was just a more refined version of the same lie. But there were moments when I almost broke. One night, Kenji was going through photos on his phone, reminiscing about our early years together. He showed me a picture from our wedding day, both of us young and hopeful and stupidly trusting. "Remember how happy we were?" he said, kissing my temple. "We're still that happy, right?" I wanted to throw his phone across the room. I wanted to scream that we were nothing, that our happiness had been built on lies, that the man in that wedding photo was a stranger to me now. But instead, I smiled and said, "Of course we are." And something inside me died a little more. Every morning, I woke up and put on my marriage like a costume. I made coffee. I asked about his day. I laughed at his jokes. And all the while, I was documenting everything, building an airtight case. I met with a divorce attorney named Patricia Chen, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd seen every permutation of marital betrayal. She listened to my story without judgment, then laid out my options with clinical precision. New York is an equitable distribution state. With proper evidence, I could walk away with half of everything we'd built together. Patricia's office was in a nondescript building in Midtown, the kind of place you could enter and leave without attracting attention, perfect for people who needed discretion. Her walls were covered with framed degrees and certifications, evidence of a career spent navigating the minefield of divorce law. She offered me tea, which I accepted gratefully. My hands were shaking. "Tell me everything," she said, pen poised over a legal pad. "Start from the beginning." I told her about the receipt, the texts, the tracking app, the Chelsea apartment, the Tokyo photos. I showed her the evidence I'd compiled, months of documentation proving Kenji's infidelity. She reviewed it all with the detached professionalism of someone who'd seen worse. When I finished, she looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You've done good work," she said. "Most clients come to me with suspicions and emotions. You've come with facts. That makes my job much easier." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we prepare for every possible outcome. We document all marital assets, separate your finances, protect your business interests. We build a case so strong that he can't fight it, even if he wants to." She paused, studying me. "But I have to ask, are you sure about this? Divorce is war. It's going to get ugly. He'll try to paint you as unstable, paranoid, maybe even accuse you of infidelity yourself. Can you handle that?" I thought about the past 3 months, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the soul-crushing pain of loving someone who didn't exist. I thought about Kenji lying next to me every night, touching me with the same hands that had touched her. I thought about the life I'd been living, a fiction written by a liar. "I can handle anything," I said, "as long as it ends with me being free." But it wasn't about the money. It was about justice. It was about making sure that Kenji couldn't rewrite our story, couldn't paint me as the crazy, paranoid wife while he played the victim. Patricia helped me prepare a comprehensive financial inventory, protecting assets that were rightfully mine. The gallery was mine alone, thank God. I'd built it before we married, maintained it through my own work. But the apartment, the savings, the investment portfolio Kenji managed, those were shared property. I wasn't about to let him hide a penny. We discovered irregularities almost immediately. Kenji had been moving money, small amounts that wouldn't trigger any alarms, into accounts I didn't know about. Patricia's forensic accountant found nearly $70,000 that had been siphoned off over the past 2 years. $70,000 of our money hidden away. For what? To set up a life with Yuki? To prepare for the day he'd leave me? The financial betrayal somehow hurt as much as the emotional one. The psychological toll was immense. I developed a permanent knot in my stomach, tension that wouldn't ease no matter what I did. I lost weight. My assistant at the gallery commented that I looked tired, stressed. I blamed it on the upcoming exhibition, the pressure of showcasing new artists. The lie came easily. I was becoming fluent in deception, learning the language Kenji had been speaking all along. Emma, my assistant, was particularly worried. She'd worked for me for 3 years, knew me well enough to see through my excuses. One afternoon, she closed the gallery office door and sat across from me with a determined look. "Mariko, what's really going on?" she asked. "And don't tell me it's the exhibition. I've seen you handle 3 shows at once without breaking a sweat. This is something else," I almost told her. The urge to confide in someone, anyone, was overwhelming. But I couldn't risk it. Not yet. Not until everything was in place. "Just personal stress," I said vaguely. "Nothing to worry about." Emma didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She just squeezed my hand and told me she was there if I needed her. Her kindness almost broke me. I cried in the gallery bathroom after she left, silent tears that I quickly washed away before anyone could see. There were close calls. Once, Kenji nearly caught me looking through his phone while he showered. I barely managed to set it down and pretend I was searching for mine. Another time, he walked in while I was on the phone with Patricia. I smoothly pivoted, claiming I was talking to a potential buyer. He believed me because he believed I was still the naive woman he'd married. His arrogance would be his undoing. The closest call happened on a Saturday morning. Kenji had gone for a run, his usual weekend routine. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter, and I was reviewing his recent messages when I heard the apartment door open. He'd forgotten his headphones. I had maybe 3 seconds. I set the phone down and grabbed the coffee pot, making it look like I'd been pouring myself a cup. Kenji walked in, grabbed his headphones from the bedroom, kissed me on his way out. He never suspected a thing. But my heart didn't stop racing for an hour afterward. The hardest part was the intimacy. Kenji still wanted his wife, still reached for me in bed, and I had to respond, had to maintain the illusion. Those nights felt like a violation of myself, a betrayal of my own body. I would lie there afterward, feeling his arm heavy across my waist, and silently recite my plan. Remind myself this was temporary, that every moment of this torture was bringing me closer to freedom. I started dissociating during sex. My body would go through the motions while my mind traveled elsewhere. I'd think about my gallery, about the exhibition I was planning, about anything but the man touching me. Kenji never noticed, or maybe he did and didn't care. Either option was damning. When it was over, I'd excuse myself to the bathroom and stand under the shower until the water ran cold, trying to wash away the feeling of contamination that clung to my skin. I started seeing a therapist, not couples counseling, which Kenji would have noticed, just my own sessions, an hour every week where I could drop the mask and feel my real feelings. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't just betrayal, but a form of psychological abuse. Gaslighting is insidious. It makes you complicit in your own deception, makes you doubt your sanity, your worth, your right to the truth. She helped me see that choosing to confront Kenji on my own terms wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming my agency. Dr. Morrison's office became my sanctuary. It was a small space in the West Village, decorated in calming earth tones, with a view of a tree-lined street. I'd sit in her comfortable armchair, a box of tissues always within reach, and let everything out. The rage, the grief, the shame, the bone-deep exhaustion of living a lie. She never judged, never told me what to do, just helped me understand my own feelings, validate my own experiences. What you're going through is a form of trauma, she explained during one session. Betrayal trauma. Your sense of reality has been shattered. The person you trusted most in the world has been systematically deceiving you. That's not just painful, it's destabilizing on a fundamental level. Why do I still love him? I asked, the question that had been tormenting me. How can I hate him and love him at the same time? Because the man you loved isn't the same person who betrayed you, Doctor, Morrison said gently. You're grieving the loss of the man you thought you knew. That's completely normal. Love doesn't just switch off because someone hurt you, but it will fade. As you distance yourself from him emotionally, as you build your new life, you'll find that love transforms into something else. Maybe indifference, maybe just a sad memory. But it won't always hurt like this. Her words gave me hope. The idea that someday I'd feel nothing when I thought about Kenji, that I'd be free of this constant ache, was like a lifeline in a storm. 6 weeks into the masquerade, I decided on the method of confrontation. It had to be public. Private confrontations would allow Kenji to control the narrative, to spin his story to our friends and his colleagues before I could defend myself. But a public revelation would force immediate accountability, and I knew exactly when and where it would happen. Our anniversary was approaching. 12 years since we'd stood in a small ceremony in Central Park, surrounded by fall leaves and impossible hope. Kenji had already made reservations at 11 Madison Park, one of New York's finest restaurants. He'd invited close friends, his business partners, people whose opinion mattered to him. It was meant to be a celebration. It would be his funeral instead. The symmetry of it appealed to me. Our marriage had begun with a ceremony, a public declaration of commitment. It would end the same way, with a public declaration of its death. Kenji loved appearances, loved being seen as the perfect husband with the perfect wife. I would shatter that image in the most spectacular way possible, in front of everyone who mattered to him. But I needed one more element. I needed Yuki there. She'd been a ghost in this story, a phantom that haunted my marriage. I wanted her to see what she'd helped destroy. More than that, I wanted Kenji to see both of us in the same room, to watch his two worlds collide. The psychological impact would be devastating, and after 3 months of being devastated myself, I was ready to return the favor. Finding Yuki's contact information was easier than expected. She worked at a PR firm in Manhattan, her professional email readily available online. I created a fake account, posing as an event coordinator for Kenji's firm. The invitation was simple. A surprise anniversary celebration for Kenji and his wife. Cocktails at 6, dinner at 7, black tie. I knew she'd come. Mistresses always want to see the wife, to measure themselves against the official version. And I knew Kenji would never mention the party to her, keeping his worlds separate as always. Crafting that email took me an hour. It had to sound professional, legitimate, not suspicious in any way. I used corporate language, formal phrasing, even created a fake email signature with a phone number that went to a burner phone I'd bought specifically for this purpose. The attention to detail was crucial. One wrong note, and she might get suspicious. "Dear Ms. Nakamura," I wrote, "you are cordially invited to a surprise anniversary celebration for Kenji Tanaka and his wife Mariko. As a valued colleague and friend, your presence would mean a great deal. Please RSVP at your earliest convenience. The event will be held at 11 Madison Park on October 15th. Cocktails at 6 p.m., dinner at 7 p.m., black tie. Please note that this is a surprise event, so we ask that you not mention it to Kenji. Perfect. Professional, innocuous, impossible to refuse." I hit send and felt a surge of dark satisfaction. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait. The response came within hours. Yuki would be delighted to attend. I imagined her reading that invitation. The thrill of danger, the secret knowledge that she was Kenji's real love. I hoped she wore her best dress. I wanted her to look beautiful when I destroyed her world. Her RSVP was brief but enthusiastic. "Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm honored to be included. I'll be there. Please let me know if there's anything I can bring." So polite, so professional. I wondered if she felt guilty at all. If some part of her recognized the wrongness of what she was doing, or if she'd rationalized it away, told herself that Kenji's marriage was already dead, that she was his true love, that I was just an obstacle to their happiness. I hoped she'd convinced herself we deserved each other, that our love was destined. I hoped she believed in fate and soulmates and all the romantic bullshit that makes people justify their worst behaviors, because the fall from that belief would be so much harder. The week before the anniversary, I moved money. Not everything. Nothing that would raise red flags, but enough to ensure I'd have resources when everything fell apart. I secured an apartment in Soho, a light-filled space near my gallery, signed a lease, paid first and last month's rent, created an exit strategy because I knew that once I pulled the trigger, there would be no going back. Kenji would become an enemy, and I needed to be ready for war. The Soho apartment was perfect. Smaller than our Upper West Side place, but it was mine. All mine. I'd furnished it minimally, just enough to live. White walls that I could fill with art, hardwood floors that caught the afternoon light. It represented possibility, a blank canvas for whatever life I'd build after Kenji. I stood in the empty living room the day I signed the lease and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I also prepared myself emotionally. I wrote letters I'd never send, poured out my rage and grief and betrayal onto pages I later burned. I said goodbye to the marriage I'd thought I had, mourned the man Kenji had never actually been. And I made peace with what I was about to do. Some people would judge me for the public humiliation, call it cruel or excessive. But those people had never had their reality systematically dismantled by someone who claimed to love them. They'd never smiled through dinner while dying inside. They'd never earned the right to their own justice. The letters were cathartic. I wrote one to the Kenji I thought I'd married, the man who'd never really existed. I told him about the life I'd imagined for us, the future I'd been building in my mind. Growing old together, maybe traveling the world when we retired, becoming the kind of couple that finishes each other's sentences. All fantasies, all lies. I burned that letter in my new apartment's fireplace, watched the pages curl and blacken, felt the death of my dreams in the smoke. I wrote another letter to the real Kenji, the liar and cheat. This one was filled with rage, with every insult and accusation I could never say to his face. I called him a coward, a manipulator, a narcissist who destroyed something beautiful for his own selfish gratification. I told him I hoped he suffered, hoped his world burned the way mine had. I burned that letter too, but I memorized every word first. The day of the anniversary arrived with that crisp October clarity that makes New York feel like the center of the universe. I spent the morning at the gallery, focusing on the concrete reality of my work, art that was real, tangible, honest. Then I went home and transformed myself into the woman Kenji expected to see. Hairstyled, makeup perfect, the navy dress he'd always loved. I looked at my reflection and barely recognized myself. The woman staring back was a stranger, harder, colder, capable of anything. I took my time getting ready, savoring each moment. This would be the last time I'd dress for Kenji, the last time I'd care about pleasing him. I applied my makeup with precision, creating the mask of the perfect wife one final time. Navy dress, pearl earrings, the necklace Kenji had given me for our 10th anniversary. I wanted to look exactly as he expected, exactly as everyone expected. The shock would be greater that way. Kenji was in a good mood, humming while he dressed. He kissed me, told me I looked beautiful, said he'd planned a wonderful evening, and he had. Just not the one he imagined. I smiled and thanked him and felt absolutely nothing. That numbness was a gift. It would get me through what came next. In the car on the way to the restaurant, Kenji held my hand. 12 years, he said, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. I can't believe it's been 12 years. Thank you for being the best wife a man could ask for. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to tell him what I knew, what I'd planned, what was about to happen. But I just squeezed his hand and said, "The best is yet to come." And I meant it, though not in the way he thought. We arrived at the restaurant at 6:45, early enough that I could survey the room, late enough that most guests had already arrived. I saw Sarah immediately, standing near the bar. She met my eyes and gave the smallest nod. Everything was in place. Patricia Chen was there too, though Kenji didn't know her. Just another guest in the crowd, witness and legal protection in one. And then I saw her, Yuki. She stood near the window, elegant in a black dress, champagne in hand. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Delicate features, perfect posture, the kind of woman men write poems about. She was talking to one of Kenji's colleagues, laughing at something he'd said, completely unaware that her secret was about to become very public. Seeing her in person was different than seeing her photos online. She was real, solid, undeniably present. This wasn't some abstract concept anymore. This was the woman who'd been fucking my husband, wearing my life like a costume she tried on when I wasn't looking. I felt a surge of hatred so pure it almost made me dizzy. But I channeled it, let it fuel my resolve. This was happening. There was no turning back now. Kenji saw his colleague and moved to join them. I watched him navigate the room, so confident, so sure of his control over his separate worlds. He didn't notice Yuki tense as we approached, didn't see the flicker of recognition in her eyes when she saw me, but I saw it. And I smiled. The moment our eyes met, I saw her realize. The color drained from her face. Her champagne glass trembled slightly. She knew something was wrong, even if she didn't know what yet. I watched her brain work through the possibilities, saw the dawning horror as she realized she'd been played. I held her gaze for a long moment, letting her see the steel in my eyes, letting her know that I knew. Then I turned away, dismissing her like the insignificant thing she was. The maitre d' announced dinner. We moved to our table, Kenji and I seated at the center with our guests arranged around us. I'd orchestrated the seating chart carefully. Yuki was 2 tables away, close enough to hear everything. Close enough to see everything, but not close enough to escape easily. Perfect. As we sat, I could feel Yuki's eyes boring into the back of my head, could sense her panic rising. She was trapped, couldn't leave without causing a scene, couldn't stay without risking exposure. She'd probably texted Kenji, asking what was happening, why she was really here. But Kenji's phone was in his pocket, on silent like always during formal dinners. He wouldn't see her messages until it was too late. Dinner began. Courses arrived with mathematical precision. Kenji made toasts. People laughed and celebrated our 12 years together. I played my part flawlessly, the grateful wife basking in her husband's attention. And all the while, I could feel Yuki's eyes on us. She knew something was wrong. Some instinct was probably screaming at her to leave, but social pressure is a powerful thing. She stayed. The food was exquisite, though I could barely taste it. Scallops, duck, some elaborate dessert that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Kenji ordered wine, expensive bottles he knew I loved. He was performing too, playing the devoted husband in front of his colleagues. I wondered if he felt any guilt at all. If some part of him recognized the monstrousness of what he was doing, bringing me here on our anniversary while his mistress sat 2 tables away. Or if he'd compartmentalized so thoroughly that he genuinely felt nothing. Midway through the main course, Kenji's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then excused himself to take a call. His business partner needed something, he explained. I watched him stand, kiss my cheek, promise to return quickly. And as he walked away, I saw him pull out his phone and switch to typing, texting someone. I knew who. I knew what he was saying. Some excuse to Yuki about why he couldn't talk to her at the party, why she should stay quiet, maintaining the deception until the very end. But what Kenji didn't know was that I'd prepared something special. While he was gone, while everyone was distracted by their meals and conversations, I nodded to the restaurant manager. A screen descended at the front of the room, the kind used for corporate presentations. Kenji's colleagues looked curious. This wasn't part of the announced program. Kenji, returning from his call, looked confused, and Yuki's face went white. The murmur in the room shifted from contentment to curiosity. People set down their forks, turned their attention to the screen. Kenji quickened his pace, trying to get back to our table, trying to figure out what was happening. But he was too late. I was already standing. I stood. Every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel my heart pounding, but my hands were steady. This was it. The moment 3 months of investigation, 6 weeks of performance, and 12 years of naivety had been leading toward. I picked up my champagne glass, letting the light catch the golden liquid. And I began to speak. The words flowed out of me in English first, clear, calm, devastating. I thanked everyone for coming to celebrate our anniversary. I talked about marriage, about trust, about the lies we tell ourselves to preserve illusions. Kenji was frozen, his face shifting from confusion to understanding to growing horror. I could see him trying to calculate, to figure out how to stop me, but it was too late. The gears were already in motion. "Marriage is fascinating," I said, my voice steady and clear. "We stand before our friends and family and promise forever. We promise honesty, loyalty, love. We promise to forsake all others. Such beautiful promises, such easy lies." Kenji's hand reached for my arm, trying to pull me down. "Mari, what are you doing?" he whispered urgently. "This isn't funny." I pulled away from him, moved out of his reach. "You're right," I said, louder now. "It's not funny at all." Then I switched to Japanese. My pronunciation was careful, deliberate. I spoke directly to the woman 2 tables away. Yuki's shock was absolute. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand. I told her in her own language that I knew everything: the apartment in Chelsea, the Tokyo trip, the lies Kenji had told us both. I said I hoped the affair had been worth it, because it was about to cost them everything. The Japanese phrases fell from my lips with surprising fluency. All those years of learning from Kenji, of trying to connect with his culture, his language. I'd done it out of love, wanting to understand him better. Now I was using his own language to destroy him. The poetry of it wasn't lost on me. "Yuki-san, jitteimasu. Zenbu, Cherushi no apato, Tokyo ryoko, subete no so." "Yuki-san, I know. Everything. The Chelsea apartment, the Tokyo trip, all the lies." The screen behind me lit up. Photos from that Tokyo trip began to scroll. Kenji and Yuki at temples. Kenji and Yuki in intimate embraces. Kenji and Yuki living a life that should have been mine. The room erupted. Gasps, shocked whispers, chairs scraping as people turned to look between me, the screen, and the woman who'd been hiding in plain sight. The images played in slow succession, each one more damning than the last. Kenji and Yuki holding hands at Fushimi Inari. Kenji and Yuki kissing at Kiyomizu-dera. Kenji and Yuki in yukatas at the ryokan, looking like they'd stepped out of a romantic movie. Each photo was a knife, but I didn't feel the pain anymore. I just felt cold, efficient satisfaction as I watched my husband's world collapse. Someone screamed. I think it was one of the wives, shocked into vocalizing what everyone else was thinking. Other people were pulling out phones, taking photos, recording video. This would be all over social media within the hour. Kenji Tanaka, respected investment banker, exposed as a cheating liar at his own anniversary party. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. Everything he'd worked for, gone in the span of minutes. Kenji tried to speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. He reached for me, but I stepped back. Our guests were in chaos. Some looked horrified, others looked angry, a few looked almost gleeful, the way people do when witnessing someone else's disaster. Sarah was filming on her phone. Patricia was taking notes. Everything was being documented. "Mari, please," Kenji finally managed to say, his voice breaking. "Let me explain. This isn't what it looks like." I laughed then, a sound that surprised even me. It was harsh, bitter, completely devoid of humor. "Isn't what it looks like? Kenji, there are photos of you fucking her. What exactly do you think it looks like?" He flinched at the profanity. I never cursed. The perfect wife didn't use crude language, but that woman was dead, and the person standing in her place had no interest in propriety. I delivered my final line in English, loud and clear. "I hope you both find happiness in each other's lies." Then I set down my champagne glass with deliberate care. It shattered across the white tablecloth, golden liquid spreading like an accusation. And I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, leaving my marriage and my humiliation behind. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was the only thing I heard as I left. The room had gone eerily quiet behind me, shock rendering everyone silent. Then, as I pushed through the doors into the cool October night, I heard the explosion of noise. Everyone talking at once, shouting questions at Kenji, whispered conversations erupting into arguments. But I didn't look back. I just kept walking, and with every step, I felt lighter, freer, like I was shedding a skin I'd been trapped in for too long. Sarah caught up with me on the sidewalk. She threw her coat around my shoulders, hailed a cab. We didn't speak during the ride to my new apartment. We didn't need to. She just held my hand while I stared out the window at the city lights, watching my old life disappear behind me. The aftermath was a hurricane. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Not in the news, thank God, but through the vicious gossip networks that govern New York's social and business circles. Kenji's reputation, built on careful networking and strategic relationships, crumbled like sand. His business partners distanced themselves. Clients questioned his judgment. How could they trust a man who'd betrayed his wife so thoroughly? If he lied to her, what else might he lie about? The financial sector runs on trust. One of the first emails I saw the next morning was from Michael, Kenji's senior partner. It was brief and devastating. Given recent events, we think it best if Kenji takes an extended leave of absence while we review his role at the firm. In Wall Street speak, that meant he was done. Partnership, gone. His clients would be redistributed. His name would become toxic. Everything he'd built over 15 years, destroyed in a single evening. Yuki fared no better. Her PR firm, built on managing image and reputation, couldn't tolerate the scandal. She was asked to take a leave of absence that everyone knew was permanent. Her social media went dark. She'd gambled on Kenji leaving me and lost everything. I felt no sympathy. She'd known he was married. She'd made her choices. I heard through the grapevine that Yuki had tried to spin the story, claiming she hadn't known Kenji was married, that he'd told her he was divorced. No one believed her. The photos of them together told a different story. She looked happy, comfortable, like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Her clients started dropping her, not wanting to be associated with someone so publicly disgraced. Within a month, she'd left New York entirely. I hoped she'd learned something. I doubted it. Kenji tried to salvage things. He called, texted, showed up at my gallery. He had explanations, apologies, promises that it was over with Yuki, that he'd made a terrible mistake but still loved me. The performance was almost convincing, but I was done being his audience. Patricia handled all communication through legal channels. Divorce proceedings moved forward with ruthless efficiency. His voice on my voicemail was pathetic. "Mari, please, just talk to me. Let me explain. I know I fucked up, but we can work through this. We've been together 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything? Please, baby, just give me a chance." I deleted each message without listening to the end. He'd had his chances. He'd wasted them all. He tried to fight for the apartment, for larger shares of our assets. But the evidence I'd gathered made his position untenable. The judge was not sympathetic to men who maintained secret apartments for their mistresses while playing devoted husband. The settlement was generous, more than fair. I walked away with half of everything we'd built together, plus my gallery and my dignity. Kenji walked away with nothing but the wreckage of his own making. The divorce took 6 months to finalize. 6 months of legal maneuvering, of Kenji's attorneys trying to find leverage that didn't exist. But Patricia was better, sharper, more prepared. Every move they made, she'd anticipated. Every argument they raised, she countered with evidence. By the end, Kenji's lawyers were advising him to take the deal, to cut his losses before he lost even more. The people who'd enabled him faced their own consequences. The colleague who'd covered for his Tokyo trip found himself professionally sidelined. Friends who'd known about Yuki but said nothing were cut from social circles by wives who realized their own husbands might be next. The scandal became a cautionary tale. Don't betray your spouse, not because it's wrong, but because you might marry someone like me. Someone who will burn your world down rather than suffer in silence. The victory should have felt sweet, and in many ways it did. But there was also an unexpected emptiness. 12 years of my life had been built on a foundation of lies. Even vindication couldn't give me back the time I'd lost, The woman I'd been before betrayal turned me into someone harder. Some nights I lay in my new Soho apartment and wondered if the cost of justice had been too high, if I'd sacrificed pieces of myself in the pursuit of revenge. But then I'd remember that hotel receipt, the gaslighting, the photos from Tokyo, the systematic way Kenji had dismantled my reality while pretending to love me. And I knew I'd made the right choice. Better to be the woman who fought back than the woman who accepted betrayal. Better to be alone with my truth than partnered with lies. My gallery became my sanctuary and my therapy. I threw myself into the work with renewed passion, curating exhibitions that explored themes of betrayal, transformation, and female resilience. The art spoke to something in me that words couldn't reach, and the business thrived. Freed from the emotional drain of maintaining my marriage, I had energy to invest in growth. I opened a second location in Brooklyn, started representing emerging artists whose work challenged comfortable narratives, built something real and lasting that was entirely mine. The Brooklyn Gallery was in Williamsburg, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and soaring ceilings. It was completely different from my Manhattan location, grittier, more experimental. I curated an opening exhibition titled After the Fall, featuring work by women artists who'd survived trauma and transformed it into art. It was personal, raw, and it resonated. The opening night was packed, pieces selling before the night was over. Critics praised it as my strongest work yet. I stood in that gallery, surrounded by art and people who appreciated it, and felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Pride, purpose, peace. Sarah was there through it all, my constant support. She never said I told you so, though she easily could have. She just showed up with wine and takeout and her steady pragmatism. I learned that friendship, real friendship, is worth more than any romance built on illusions. The family you choose matters more than the family you're promised. We had a ritual. Every Friday night, Sarah would come over with Thai food from my favorite place. We'd eat straight from the containers, drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes we'd talk about Kenji, about the divorce, about what I'd been through. Other times, we'd deliberately avoid the topic, focusing instead on gallery business, on her latest tech project, on stupid TV shows and celebrity gossip. Those nights were healing in a way therapy couldn't match. I started dating again, tentatively. Nothing serious. I wasn't ready for serious. But casual dinners with men who made me laugh, who respected boundaries, who treated transparency as a baseline rather than an optional feature. It was strange, learning to trust again. Every time someone said they'd call and didn't, I felt that old paranoia rising. But I was working through it, one day at a time. The first date was terrifying. His name was Marcus, an art collector I'd met at a gallery event. He was kind, funny, completely open about his life. When he suggested dinner, I almost said no. The thought of trusting someone new, of making myself vulnerable again, was paralyzing. But Dr. A. Morrison had encouraged me to try, to not let Kenji's betrayal close me off from future possibilities. So I said yes. Dinner was awkward at first. I was hypervigilant, analyzing every word Marcus said, looking for inconsistencies or red flags. When he excused himself to take a phone call, I immediately assumed the worst. But he came back, explained it was his sister calling about their mother's birthday, showed me the calendar reminder on his phone without me even asking. His transparency was jarring after years of Kenji's secrecy. By the end of the night, I'd relaxed enough to actually enjoy myself. We dated casually for a few months. Nothing heavy, just dinners and museum visits, and easy conversation. Marcus understood I wasn't ready for anything serious, respected my boundaries without making me feel like I was damaged goods. Eventually, it fizzled out naturally, but it taught me something important. I could trust again. Maybe not easily, maybe not without effort, but I could do it. That knowledge was invaluable. The experience taught me to trust my instincts. Every time something had felt wrong with Kenji, it was wrong. My gut had been trying to warn me, but I'd talked myself out of listening. Never again. Now when something feels off, I investigate. I ask questions. I refuse to gaslight myself for someone else's comfort. It's a hard-won wisdom, paid for in tears and sleepless nights, but it's mine. I also learned about the psychology of manipulation. Kenji wasn't a monster. He was a man who wanted everything without consequences. The comfortable marriage, the exciting affair, the respect of his peers. He'd compartmentalized beautifully, convincing himself that what I didn't know wouldn't hurt me. But compartmentalization is just another word for lying. And lies, no matter how well-intentioned, always hurt someone. Usually the person who trusted you most. Financial abuse had been part of the pattern too, though I hadn't recognized it at the time. Kenji had controlled our finances, made decisions about investments without consulting me. He'd used our shared money to fund his affair, literally paying for his betrayal with assets we'd built together. The cash withdrawals, the secret apartment, all of it was financial manipulation disguised as household management. I warn women now to watch for those signs, to maintain their own accounts, their own credit, their own financial independence. Love shouldn't require surrendering your economic agency. The signs of narcissism had been there too. The way Kenji had deflected blame made me feel crazy for questioning him, maintained such rigid control over his image. Narcissists are excellent at creating false realities where they're always the hero. They rewrite history to suit their narrative. They make you doubt your own memories, your own experiences. Breaking free from that psychological manipulation is harder than leaving the relationship itself. The real work happens afterward, in therapy, in rebuilding your sense of what's true. If you're reading this or listening to my story and something resonates, pay attention. Trust that instinct. You're not crazy. You're not paranoid. If something feels wrong, investigate, gather evidence, protect yourself. Don't make the mistake I did of prioritizing peace over truth. Peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's just postponed chaos. And to those who've been through similar betrayals, I want you to know that you can survive this. You can even thrive. The person who betrayed you wanted you to believe you couldn't exist without them. They wanted you small and dependent and grateful. Prove them wrong. Build a life so magnificent it makes their betrayal look like the petty, pathetic thing it was. That's the best revenge. Not public humiliation, though that felt good. Not financial victory, though that was fair. The best revenge is becoming someone so authentically yourself that their lies can never touch you again. My story isn't unique. Betrayal happens every day, in every city, to people who never saw it coming. But what you do with that betrayal defines you. You can internalize it. Let it make you bitter and closed. Or you can use it as fuel. Let it forge you into something stronger. I chose the latter. Some days are harder than others. Some nights I still wake up angry at the years I lost. But mostly, I wake up grateful. Grateful I found out. Grateful I fought back. Grateful I'm free. There are still hard days. Days when I see a couple walking hand in hand and feel a pang of envy. Days when I question whether I'll ever be able to fully trust someone again. Days when the loneliness feels overwhelming, when the silence of my apartment is too loud. But those days are becoming fewer. And even on the hard days, I never wish I was back with Kenji. Whatever pain I feel now is clean, honest pain, not the corrupting ache of living a lie. So here I am, 43 now, running my gallery, making my art, living a life that's messy and uncertain, but completely authentic. I'm not the naive woman who found that hotel receipt. I'm not the performing wife who smiled through her pain. I'm someone new, someone harder and softer simultaneously, someone who knows her worth and won't settle for less, someone who learned that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I'm finally, blessedly indifferent to Kenji and his choices. He's a cautionary tale in my rearview mirror. Nothing more. I've started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. My own work, not just curating others. Abstract pieces that explore themes of fracture and healing, darkness and light. They're raw, emotional, completely different from the careful, controlled work I did in my 20s. These paintings come from a deeper place, a wounded place that's learning to heal. I'm planning an exhibition of my own work next year. The thought terrifies me, being that vulnerable in public. But I'm ready for it. The last time I saw him was 6 months ago. I was at a gallery opening in Chelsea, networking with collectors. He walked in with a woman I didn't recognize, not Yuki, someone new. He saw me and his face went through a complicated series of emotions. Shame, anger, something that might have been longing. I looked at him and felt nothing. That emptiness was freedom. I turned back to my conversation and never looked his way again. Later, I heard he'd left quickly, uncomfortable in my presence. Good. Let him be uncomfortable. Let him feel a fraction of what he put me through. The woman he was with looked young, maybe early 30s. Pretty in a generic way, designer clothes, trying too hard. I wondered if he'd told her about me, about what he'd done, or if he'd crafted a new lie, painted himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife. I hoped, for her sake, that she was smarter than I'd been, that she'd see the signs early and get out before he destroyed her too. But I didn't warn her. That wasn't my responsibility. Some lessons you can only learn the hard way. As for Yuki, I have no idea where she is. Truthfully, I don't care. She was a symptom of Kenji's dysfunction, not the cause. He would have cheated with someone else, if not her. People who deceive don't do it because they met the right person. They do it because they're fundamentally dishonest. Yuki just happened to be convenient. I hope she learned something from the experience, but that's her journey, not mine. I heard rumors that she'd moved to Los Angeles, trying to rebuild her career somewhere her reputation hadn't preceded her. Or maybe she went back to Japan, seeking refuge in family and familiarity. Either way, she was no longer my problem. The anger I'd felt toward her had faded into something like pity. She'd thrown away her integrity for a man who was never going to leave his wife, who might have strung her along for years if I hadn't intervened. In a way, I'd freed her too. Not that she'd ever thank me for it. I want to leave you with this. Whether you're in Phoenix or Portland, Miami, or Minneapolis, wherever you're listening to this story, know that betrayal isn't personal, even though it feels that way. It's a reflection of the betrayer's character, not your worth. You deserved better. You deserve better now. And you have the power to create that better life for yourself. Don't wait for an apology that will never come. Don't wait for the betrayer to suddenly develop a conscience. Take your power back. Tell your truth. Walk away with your head high. Build something beautiful from the ashes. If my story resonates with you, if you've been through something similar or you're going through it now, leave a comment. Tell me where you're from and what time it is there. Tell me if you agree with how I handle things or if you would have done it differently. There's power in community, in knowing you're not alone. And if this story helped you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about real life, real pain, and real triumph. I've got 2 more videos you might enjoy on screen. One about financial recovery after divorce, another about rebuilding trust after betrayal. Check them out. Until the next story, take care of your heart. It's more resilient than you think. And remember, you're not defined by what was done to you. You're defined by how you rise from it. I'm Mariko, and this was my story. Thank you for listening.